this is the thing I think for parents we've got to preoccupy ourselves with, not just controlling our children's behaviors, but helping equip them and prepare them for life, right?
That's good.
And so, maybe some of the things that we were raised on, we have to assess and reevaluate.
All right, guys. Welcome. Real Talk Phoenix podcast,
Yes, sir.
episode 3. Super stoked to be with you guys. It's been an interesting week. Had my second child
Number
a few
2.
days ago. Well, I didn't do much. My wife did.
That's true.
Everything pretty much. So, Katie, you're awesome. Thank you so much for giving me a beautiful daughter. So that's why our podcast is coming when it does, but that just means that we're going to be producing even more stuff. And as you can see, we're in a new secret location instead of the old one. And so we're super stoked for what we have to talk to you guys about today. And so, as you know, our aim is to help you build connection and trust with any teenager you regularly engage with in your life. And so today, we wanted to go ahead and dive into something that's really important. It's that season that's coming up.
Yeah.
And what season is that, John?
Holiday season.
Holiday season, right? And what does that mean? That means that you're going to be spending time with family and friends.
Yeah.
Now, for some of us, that experience can be positive or negative, right? And so for some of us, we're looking forward to Thanksgiving. We're looking forward to Christmas. We're looking forward to fall break, right? Getting a couple of weeks off school. Shout out to all the high schoolers that are going to be on fall break over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But for some of us, we may be even dreading the holiday season coming up, right? Because aunts and uncles or cousins that we've fallen out with, or fights that we know that are going to happen between our parents and our aunts and uncles, right? And so what we wanted to do is just hone in on the reality of family, talk a little bit about forgiveness, which I think we mentioned in our last podcast, but dive into that in a little bit more detail, and then kind of give you guys a pathway that we kind of use that's a part of our membership platform in terms of engaging your family, walking in forgiveness, and building connection and trust amongst you guys so that you can have a better connection. And then hopefully your family season can be a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more happy. You can make more memories, or it can improve the goodness that you already are experiencing. And so as we dive in, I thought we'd share a little bit about our experience. So I'm going to do what I do and ask John. So John, in your experience with your family, tell me a little bit about what holiday season would look like.
Yeah. To be honest, my family and I aren't super close the way most families are. But I will say this holiday season for me definitely brings up a lot of memories because the one family member that I was closest to, my mother, passed away a few years ago. And around this time, I tend to call back on those memories, family memories, obviously. And so it's not even necessarily an issue of spending time and worried about the drama that might happen at, family get-togethers and things like that over the holiday. It's more just thinking about what I've lost and what I don't have anymore.
Yeah.
And then...
Wow, I didn't even think about that.
Right.
That could be exactly what holiday season is for some people who are listening.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I've always thought really motivated this whole forgiveness thing, right? As bad as people can be, and I'm not meaning to diminish anyone's suffering if they've gone through some terrible trauma at the hands of a family member. That's totally understandable, but what I've seen a lot of times when I talk to people is the issues that they have with family is stuff that could be reconciled pretty simply,
Yeah.
I don't say easy, I just mean simple. Like the issue of having a conversation, that's quite a simple thing, right? But not necessarily an easy thing. And so I think, I think about that, and I've tried really hard in my own family, the family that I have left. My little sister also a few years back, my only sibling passed away suddenly as well. And so, there's been a lot of loss, but at the same time, it's really made me value the people that I have in my life.
Yeah.
But the weird part about it is that I've found that getting into that relationship and having the depth of relationship that I want, that takes work. And I think forgiveness is a big part of that.
Crucial part. Yeah, it's right. I mean, even as you say that, to have that kind of depth of relationship you want with a family member or a friend for that matter, a parent having it with their teenager, there has to be this like intentionality to it. It can't just be something that you think is going to happen just because you're related to each other, right?
Mm.
It's going to happen because both of you guys intentionally participate in like trying to build that kind of relationship, or at least one of you starts the process of intentionally trying to build that relationship,
Absolutely.
right? And then as a consequence, what happens is the other person might participate or begin to participate, and then you really begin to build the kind of relationship that you want to have. And so I thought it's super interesting that, yeah, man, I didn't even remember that as we were kind of starting this. Wow, yeah, you've experienced a lot of heartache and trauma, man, in this area in particular. And so that season can be, this season can be a really different experience for you than it is for me. Obviously, you know, I come from a broken home, so my parents were separated. So growing up, it was kind of weird. It was kind of like this tug of war between whose house I was going to be at. You know, kind of like, oh,
sure.
My dad's like, oh, you coming over on Christmas Day? And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, I'm going to go to my dad's on Christmas Day. I'm going to go to both on Christmas Day. I'm going to spend Christmas Day with somebody else completely, entirely, right? Like neither my mom nor my dad. And so it was like this really interesting, weird experience. And now even being married and having kids when I'm, you know, at home in England, and the same thing happens. You know, I'm at my mom's house usually. And then my dad's like, hey, you coming over for Christmas? You know, in England, we celebrate Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. That's what we call it. So, you know, usually I go to his house for Boxing Day.
So do you fight with each other?
So, okay.
That's what it would be in America.
Super random,
it would actually be fighting.
But from what I understand, the reason why it was coined Boxing Day is because on Boxing Day, what used to happen is people would package food and send it to other countries or other places, right? Cool. The day after Christmas. So I think that's why they called it Boxing Day. I'm sure if I'm wrong, somebody who listens to this is going to correct me.
They're going to charge you up.
So we'll find it in the comment section somewhere, no doubt. But I'm okay with learning too.
So anyways, Boxing Day.
Yeah. So that was a really interesting experience. And so it was kind of like this sense of like a division and like having to choose one parent over the other, and always feeling like you were letting a parent down by going with the other parent, if that kind of made sense.
Yeah.
And I was also having a conversation about this on Wednesday with a student who had mentioned that her parents, she caught an email chain between her parents basically talking about how they're trying to get her to live with them. So each one is fighting for custody. And the reason they want that is so they can get the child support from the other parent.
Goodness.
And so she's in the midst of this and feeling like, man, neither of my parents care about me. So as I even think about her, she's probably not looking forward to this holiday season either.
Right.
And so, yeah, man, it's just interesting to think about and process through what people might be experiencing in this juncture at this season. And for some people, the experience may not be as catastrophic or as far-fetched as what we're talking about, but it may just be simply dreading seeing that family member, or, you know, a parent dreading having to engage their teen in the way that is necessary during the time that person is not, that teen's not at school, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
You know, I do think, though, the holiday season can be a time of healing as well.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, you can anticipate the drama that's going to happen.
That's true.
But if you already know what's going to happen, it can kind of help you formulate a plan. And like I've said, if you're able to get in that headspace already where you value the person, you realize that there's some distance between the two of you, or there's some offense that's between the two of you, rather than just letting that thing stay there. And I think that this is what losing a loved one will really teach you, is much, because you don't want to live with regret. You don't want to think, man, if I had one more day with that person, could I have just gotten over the things that I needed to get over? And nothing clarifies that for you more than death.
Wow.
Right? And so if we are conscientious of the fact that that's really going to happen in everyone's life, then
it's a good point.
Right? It makes us reevaluate our relationships.
Yeah, our priorities, right? Because we take for granted the fact that this person's in our life, right?
Exactly.
Man, that's good. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, you know, and I think that that's one of the things that we've forgotten just in modern culture, the preeminence of death, you know, with technology getting the way it is. And
we don't even think
medicine,
about it.
Right, you know. And in some regard, I mean, you don't want to walk around thinking the sky's going to fall all the time. But definitely when it comes to relationships, I think it's helpful to be conscientious of those realities.
Yeah.
You know, and to make it a motivator.
Yeah. So how do you feel like, or how do you feel, how important is forgiveness in terms of the family unit? So like, how is it important? How important is it, for us to walk out in forgiveness in terms of our family members?
Sure. I would say it's got to be right up there in the top 3 or 5. I'm tempted to say it's like the top one.
Yeah.
I know better than that, and I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just pulling on my personal experience from my life and from my family. I think a lot of what happens, you have these expectations when you get married and what relationships will be like, what your children are going to be like, what your family life is going to be like, what your economic status is going to be like, what all of these things are going to be like. And that's perfectly fine because we're rational beings. We're people who plan and work our plan the best we can for the most part. Even if the plan is just to wake up and, get some clothes on, that's still, coming up with an idea of what you're going to do for that day.
Yeah.
So I think when we consider all those things and take that into account, especially as it regards relationships, we've got to ask ourselves, like, what do I plan for this relationship? Do I plan to make everyone around me perfect where I don't have any problems?
Yeah.
That's a bad strategy.
Yeah, it's true.
Right? Because what ends up happening is you're either successful in that and then everyone around you is on pins and needles.
Yeah,
because
they're pretending.
You've achieved your ability to control people's response. But have you achieved intimacy? Have you achieved connection and closeness?
That's good.
Right? And for people to be able to be themselves around you also means that those people have to be able to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And when they make mistakes, typically those mistakes aren't even necessarily good or bad, righteousness or sin, right? It's, I don't like what you did because that bothers me.
Yeah.
And so I think if we're conscientious of that and we can be aware, then we can recognize that not only do I need to perhaps forgive this person, but I may also have to ask for forgiveness. That takes an incredible amount of humility.
Yeah, it does.
Because forgiveness is not just a one-way street, right? It's transactional. We offend and we get offended.
Yeah.
And so for us in our family, I feel like one of the foundational things that keeps our intimacy alive, that keeps our relationships going when we hit those speed bumps, obviously conversation, but just this understanding of human frailty and that we all make mistakes.
Yep.
And that we're, as a family unit, trying to achieve intimacy together, not just in isolation.
It's something that we're trying to move towards as a goal, right?
Yeah, does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think something you alluded to that's really important is this reality of, like, when we're trying to build these relationships, it's not just about the wrong that's been done to us, but it's about the wrong that we've done.
Sure.
And when we are honest and take stock of that reality, then what it does is it allows us to move towards the person that we're trying to engage with a little bit more grace, right? And a little bit more understanding, because we understand that we have shortcomings and we fail too. And so like, we're not just coming towards them acting like, we don't stink and they're the only ones that do. But we recognize, like, yo, I got some stuff going on too. And it's not everything is working out all great for me in my life. And there are areas where I'm really good and there are areas where I'm not so good. And so I recognize that this may just be a place for you that's not so good. And I need to be graceful and forgiving in that area, understanding that you need to do the same for me in the areas where I'm weak. And so,
yeah, that's good, man. As
we move through this, we kind of wanted to give you guys kind of a little framework that we use. So we created something a few months ago called the RLTK, or the Real Talk Phoenix Tribe Membership. And the whole idea behind that was, how can we help parents have better connection and conversations with their teenagers about the things that matter, like deeply worldview shaping topics, issues of our day that we're all wrestling through, all talking about, or teens are in particular amongst themselves. How can we help parents have those conversations with their teenagers? Because we believe parents are supposed to be the primary influence over their child's destiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how can we help with that and give parents the resources that they need to have those conversations, and in the midst of it, build connection and trust? And a part of that is something that we created that we called a success path. And the whole idea behind that was, how do we help people understand what it is that we're creating, how it will work for them, and then how they can track their progress through it. And so we came up with 4 things that they need to do, which is assess, listen, reconcile, and build. So we just want to take a few minutes to kind of walk through those. And so obviously assess is pretty simple, assessing of self, right? And so I think, like we just said, it's real easy to assess the other person and figure out what's wrong with them real quick.
Yes.
But in terms of taking a moment and assessing self and reflecting on self and what's going on the inside of you, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, where are the areas that you're strong, where are the areas that you're weak. And so, John, my question to you is, why is self-assessment even important?
Self-assessment for me is super important because, like I was saying earlier, there's things that I do to offend. Mm-hmm. And when I offend the people that I love, sometimes I'm not aware of the thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'm getting mad at everyone around me because they're acting the kind of way. And I'm like, why are you acting this way? Mm. And then what will typically happen is normally an argument will happen or some kind of emotional outburst or things like that. And then it comes out, you reacted this way. This is what happened. This is why I'm offended.
Yep.
And normally what will happen for myself and for others that I've met that I've had this similar conversation with, that they're like, man, sometimes I make mistakes and I offend people and I'm not even aware that that's what I'm doing.
Yep.
And so I think it's helpful in the assess portion, what we're talking about is to kind of just take a step back, think of some of the conversations that you've had, the arguments, the family drama, whatever, where something comes up and it typically is a routine thing that either your children or your partner or your loved ones, whoever it is in your family, are saying, man, you always do this, you act this way, and this is what sets us off, or this is what disturbs the family. And so as I assess those things, what I'm doing is I'm asking myself, okay, my family or my loved ones are saying this, and at that point, I want to hear what they're saying and drop anything inside of me that attempts to justify why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm really just trying to hear their feedback.
That's good.
And I'm really just trying to take all that in and kind of put myself in their shoes for a minute and think, how would I feel if someone were speaking to me the way I'm speaking to my family?
Yeah.
And so for me, I try to put myself in their role, and I try to think, the whole golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right?
Yeah, that's good.
And so, I think ultimately when you assess, and obviously if you're saying I want to improve the conversational dynamics, my relationship, whatever, there has to be a healthy self-assessment that's honest, that's not just trying to make yourself look good. That you can justify yourself in assessment. Yes, perfect, good, 10. If that's the approach that you're taking in the assessment, that's really the wrong approach.
Yeah. I agree.
So does that make sense? How
it does.
I'm not saying you want to degrade yourself or beat up on yourself, but what I'm saying is if there are conversational loggerheads that you're at with your family, or just relational toughness, or like we're talking about, a need to forgive and move on to enjoy holidays and family relationship, all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. If you understand that there's difficulty, you want to own your part of that.
Yep.
That's all we're trying to say.
Yep. And I think
assess.
Yeah, I think as you're talking, you even touched on a little bit of the listen portion, which we'll dive into even more in just a second. But as I think about assess, it's this like stepping back and kind of like really thinking on who you are. And, there's times where we're having a conversation with a loved one and something they say sets us off, right?
Yes.
And it may not necessarily be.
Quite often.
Yeah. Truth. It may not even necessarily be, right, that person said something to upset you.
Exactly.
It's just that for whatever reason, maybe because of something you experienced in the past, or because you're having a bad day and you're frustrated anyway about something completely different, you decided to respond by taking it out on that person. Well, why is that? What is it that's going on the inside of you that will cause you to respond that way? Why is it when you hear certain things from your teenager or certain things from your parent, friend, whoever it is, that it sets you off? Like, what is it about that makes you feel the way that it does? How does it make you feel, right? And as you start to reflect on that stuff and really figure out like what's going on the inside of you and what story you're living out of, because the reality is, right, we all have our own stories, right? Yeah. And we all have our own experiences and things that we've been throughout our lives. But those experiences shape our responses towards other people, including our family members, right? Those things don't stay in a box. Our stories are what make us who we are. And our stories are what basically shape us into who we are presently and also what we'll become in the future. And so if we're not self-aware enough to know that that's the case and then also evaluate those things, good and bad and ugly, what we end up doing is responding to people out of parts of our story that we haven't become self-aware about yet, and that can be extremely detrimental to the relationships we're trying to have, right? We end up sabotaging those relationships because we haven't evaluated whether the things that we're living out of are the right things to live out of, right? And so, for example, if my parents were divorced, so, a narrative for me is like, I don't want to be like my dad, or, anytime somebody says something difficult or doesn't do what I want them to do, I'm like, oh, I guess they're going to abandon me, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's not necessarily true.
That's true.
And that will cause me to respond in a certain way. It might be like, well, hey, I'm going to press the eject button first before you do. Right? And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that person just didn't want to go to a restaurant with me that night. And now we're not friends anymore because I felt like they were going to abandon me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or,
it's so much more than just the event that's happening.
Exactly. There's all this stuff that's intertwined in that moment that makes that moment what it is. But we haven't taken the time to reflect and assess. And so as a consequence, we don't know. And we just live out of that stuff subconsciously, not knowing that it's affecting our relationships with our family members. And what we really desire is to be connected to them. But because of all this junk, we don't get it, right? Because we're living out of that instead of living out of wholeness and health.
Yeah. I think, too, just to add on to that, as you were speaking, I was thinking that something that I've seen, too, before is with parents, they've lived a lot more life than their children. So there's a real temptation by the parent to get into kind of a self-righteous mentality concerning the direction that they're giving their children.
Yeah.
Where it's like they can't even hear what their child is trying to say to them. It's kind of like the whole, when you complain to your parents and they're like, hey, don't talk to me. I used to have to walk 10 miles uphill in the snow when I went to school, right? Like those things may be true. Those situations that parents went through may have actually happened. But do we have to have a self-righteous attitude about it when we deal with our kids? And what I mean by self-righteous is that we are thinking that our perspective and our view on a situation is the final, this is the way it was, this is the way it's going to be, this is the way it's always been. And when you assess that, is the goal simply to get your children to see things the way you saw it and do things the way you did it and replicate the step? Or is it an attempt to help them achieve the thing that God's called them to, or whatever they want to achieve with their life, right? This is the thing I think for parents we've got to preoccupy ourselves with, not just controlling our children's behaviors, but helping equip them and prepare them for life, right?
That's good.
And so, maybe some of the things that we were raised on, we have to assess and reevaluate.
That's good. All right. So now we want to move on to the next portion that we had for you guys, and this is the listen phase. And we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, the idea of listening to the significant other, the teen, the parent that you're trying to rebuild that relationship with, that trust, that connection. And John kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. It's kind of like this reality of, I need to listen to that person. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? When I have conversations with them and I say certain things, what are they experiencing as I say those things, right? Because remember, on the flip side, we just talked about the reality that as I interpret things, I interpret those things a particular way, right? Now, the same is true for the person you're trying to engage in conversation with. So perhaps the reality is that there may be certain things that you say and do that need to change. But we can't know that unless we take the time to really, truly listen to that other person. And then there's also the reality as well that I may think that what I am doing is a really good thing.
Right.
But for what if for the person that I'm doing it for, it's not? Then what becomes important? Does it become important for me to be right and for the thing that I'm doing to be right in my eyes? Or does it become important for the thing that I'm doing to not be right for the sake of the person that I'm trying to connect with, and perhaps it causes me to change a behavior that I have or an attitude that I have for the sake of connection, trust, relationship, and deep, meaningful conversation with that significant person.
Right. And I think that's what listening really does. It helps you play the long game.
Yeah. Because
you've got to establish trust in any relationship. And if there's an offense, we've talked about all of this in the context of forgiveness and how to overcome an offense when it happens.
Yeah.
And I think the way that you do that is you take the time to listen to the other person what I found a lot of times when people have conversations with one another, it's really just an attempt to like talk about it, sweep it under the rug, and get over it. But what happens when you really have conversation and when you really continually listen to a person over and over and over again, what happens is that your preconceived notions of who they are, your judgmental aspects inside of your mind of the caricature of this person that you've already created, it starts to crumble. If you really have conversation, if you really listen, and then what happens is you learn who that person actually is in reality, and you're able to understand from that point how to progress in the relationship. So listening, what I see with a lot of people is they listen to be able to find the flaw in the other person's thinking.
So they can be right.
So that they can be right, and so that they can solve the problem in the relationship quickly. Again, relationships, some things are solved quickly. Some things you just have to play the long game in. Because again, you're establishing trust, you're establishing rapport. And if that's already been broken, where offense has entered in, or you've done a particular behavior over and over and over again, and you feel like you've lost the confidence of your teen. Sometimes your teens don't say that. They just stop coming to you for stuff.
No, it's true.
They just stop referencing you.
That's a good point.
Right?
And parents are like, yo, why is my teen not talking to me? Why are they not sharing with me?
Well, most people think everything's cool because their teenager's not talking to them. Well, if there's a problem, they let me know.
That's true, and that's a generational shift, right?
Because, and what's the one thing that we see on social media that teenagers love to do? Communicate.
It's true.
So if they're silent to their parents, that should be a red flag. That should be an indicator.
Wow.
Not all the time, you know.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like, I'm just thinking about one of the things that I do is I'm on, obviously, social media, jumping in a lot of parent groups just to see and hear and listen to what parents are experiencing. And so many times I'm in a parent group and I hear a parent say, man, I thought my teen was doing great, and then next thing I know, I find out they're sending nudes to dudes in schools or vice versa or whatever else, and it's like they're completely shocked, and like their world is falling apart because they had no idea that their teenager, their tween or whatever is engaging in this kind of behavior, right?
Sure.
And like it genuinely shocks them, and I'm just like, yo, how could you not know? It's because they're not communicating, right?
Yes.
That is, it's good, man. That is really good. So,
And it's not that you can, there's no magic pill that you can take to become the perfect
that's
parent.
True.
You know, I mean.
And that's the point, right?
Right.
That's the point. That's why conversation becomes so important, because it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Because neither of the people in the conversation are perfect, and both are searching for the same thing, right? And so we have to do it together, and that means there has to be this level of vulnerability and sharing and listening. And obviously we're talking about listening, this reality of like actually hearing what the person in front of you has to say about you, what they really think, what they really feel, creating a space where if they actually feel safe enough to do that. Like, think about that. If you can actually get your teenager to share with you what they really think and what they really feel, there is something that you're doing as a parent, as a guardian, as a leader, that is incredible to bring a teenager to that space where they can feel like they trust you enough to share with you who they really are and what they really think. There's something that's happening there that's right. Now, that doesn't mean that every single decision they make is going to be right. And that doesn't mean that now they're going to be perfectly behaved and do everything you want them to do. But it does mean you have a real relationship with them. And that's the foundation for that.
And it means that they're going to come to you.
Yep. And it means they're going to listen too.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like you've built something into the relationship. You've built that trust in where they feel like they can listen to you and they can share with you. And, you're going to respond by helping them. Because once again, what is it? You recognize that, like, hey, I have shortcomings too. Hey, I've messed up too. Hey, I've made bad decisions too. And so as we do this listening thing, right, we can listen to that person's story and experience their story, and then that can help us make sense of why they behave the way they behave, but also why they respond to the things I say the way they do.
Right.
And now that gives me the fodder I need to move on to the next point, which would be to reconcile, right? And so I think the reason, just to dive into this a little bit, I think the reason why this is so important is because in our culture, right, especially in the West, we kind of live out of hierarchy. And so, like, if you look at
what is hierarchy? What
so
do you mean?
Basically, there's always people on top of people, right? There's always a group of people, then a person managing them, and then a group of people and a person managing them, and then people managing them, right? Then you get to the CEO, and the CEO has a board. right? And they manage the CEO. The CEO has to report to the shareholders or whatever it is. Yeah, the chain of command, the hierarchy, the system, the way that we have organized our organizations to be formed and to move and operate a particular way. Well, obviously that's seeped into the way that we do relationships in our homes, right? So fundamentally, the parents are on top of the hierarchy, right? Because they're the parents. And so because we live out of this reality in our other systems outside the home, we begin to live out of it inside the home as well. And so a lot of times in these situations, it makes sense for the parent to just be like, hey, this is the way the world works. I pay the bills. I run stuff. This is the way it's going to be, and this is what you're going to do. And if you don't like it, you can get out, or if you don't like it, you're going to be grounded for 6 months. And I'm not saying that there isn't this reality that, our teenagers need to be challenged or experience consequences for their actions.
Absolutely.
Or be grounded or be punished or any of those types of things. All of those things are necessary. But I think that needs to be built on the foundation of relationship, right? And so when we don't have that, stuff goes awry. Now, the reality is what needs to happen is I need to take the power that I've been given by society as the parent, right? The person who's running things and leading things, and use that to serve my son or my daughter, right? To serve my teen. And what does that mean? I demonstrate to them the way I want them to behave. So if I want them to be vulnerable, it would make sense that I would have to be vulnerable with them first as the leader, right? As the one in charge, right? If I want them to be forgiving and loving and kind, then I need to demonstrate that to them. And so this whole idea of reconcile is basically, now you can take the information from the way that you've assessed yourself and the way that you've listened and say, okay, how can I move towards my teenager? How can I move towards the person I'm trying to build this deep, meaningful relationship with in ways that's going to foster connection and trust? So where can I apologize? Where can I ask for forgiveness? Where can I show more love? Where can I show more kindness? Where can I sacrifice the things that I want for the things that they want to demonstrate to them, hey, I really care about you? Where can I do a better job of listening? Where can I do a better job of being more interested in the things that they're interested in, right? And so now I've taken the power that society has given me as a parent, and I think rightfully it is yours, right? You're the parent. But now I'm using it to serve my teenager, and it shifts the paradigm a little bit.
Right. And it makes them kind of in charge in a way.
I think, well, it's kind of like, I love what you say, right? If I give my kid the TV remote, does my kid now own the TV? No.
Right.
I've just given them the remote so they can change the channels. It still belongs to me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so I'm giving them a sense of like
control.
Yeah, but I don't think it's about control as much as it is about being valued as a person. And I think that communicates to teenagers that they're valued as a person, right? That they have something to say, that they have something to contribute, right? That they're not just somebody who has to do what I say, but they're actually a valuable member of the family unit, and that they have something to contribute to the family unit, and that their voice matters, that their life matters, right?
Yeah.
Like, I harp on this a lot. It's not just about what we say, it's about what we do. It's not just about what we say about our structures and our systems and our organizations, but do our systems and our structures and our organizations actually communicate what we say in their operation, right? And so if we say we love our kids and we care about the things that they care about, but all we demonstrate is that we don't by our actions, right? And the way that we conduct ourselves and our attitude in the house and outside the house, then they're obviously going to take that as truth.
How do you think
and
that
not what you say as truth? Well, I think it gets communicated.
Like they feel like they're not loved. Is it through the attitude the parents have when they correct the behavior that you've noticed?
I think it can be all of those things, right? It can be,
because I think most parents, even though the tactic that they're using when they correct their child is perhaps unloving or communicating the wrong thing, I'm certain that 99% of parents, that's coming from a place of love for your teenager.
Yeah, for sure. But once again, it comes back to the reality of your own story, right?
So
if I've been taught that this is the way to love and correct somebody, right? But it may not necessarily be the best way to actually love and correct somebody. I can believe that the thing that I'm doing is totally in the best interest of my child. And I feel joy and love as I do this thing for their best interest.
Sure.
But that's not what's being communicated to them. And once again, the generational gap.
Well, you've taken the time to discover that.
Yeah, but if you haven't, then what happens is you just do it anyway, and you don't really know whether it's having the desired effect that you want it to. right? Because you haven't taken the time to really figure out if that's the case. Is this thing really helping you? Do you really understand what I'm doing? Do you really understand why? Do you really understand that it's that I love you and care for you and want what's best for you, right? And so it'd be interesting. I mean, I'm even thinking about this right now. What if, teens were more involved in the consequences or the discipline process for themselves? You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, what kind of discipline should I give you and why?
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And when I've seen that, it's actually pretty interesting.
Right.
I mean, I was having a conversation just on campus the other day about family once again. And I asked these teenagers like, yo, why don't you share with your parents? Or we don't trust them. They're just going to discipline us. They're just going to, tell us that we're wrong. And I'm like, well, should they trust you? Should they trust you? And they were like, actually, no, our parents shouldn't trust us. And if I was a parent of a teenager, I wouldn't trust them either. And so it was really interesting that as I gave them the opportunity to like evaluate their own behavior,
that's a good point.
They recognized that their own behavior wasn't the best behavior that they needed to partake in, and they probably should stop doing the things that they're doing and do other stuff.
And that's one of the things I've discovered too with the conversations I've had with teenagers before. We think that our teenagers stay away from us because they're just so happy to live the way that they're living or do the things that they're doing.
Yeah.
The reality is many of them feel ashamed for what they're doing and they feel stuck. And they're afraid that if they talk to their parents about what's really going on, that their parents won't listen. This is what we've been talking about. Or that their parents will just lose their mind over the situation.
Yep.
So what we've got to realize that's happening a lot of times, it's not that the teenager is enjoying the place that they're at. It may appear that way.
Yeah.
But the reality is that sometimes they've done things, they know it's wrong, like you're talking about, and they just feel ashamed of it, and they don't feel like anyone other than their friends would understand.
Yeah, it's true.
And so how can the blind lead the blind? How can two people who are ashamed help each other out other than just to wallow in that shame?
Yep.
Literally, these conversations, parents have the ability to rescue their children from a life of shame.
That's good, man.
Right?
Or pour it on.
Or, exactly. That's good. It's profound.
Man. And so, reconciling, super important. How can we move towards them? Start to rebuild that bridge. We go across first, and then they start coming across second. And then who knows what can happen from that? Well, we do know what happens from there. Connection, trust, transformation, honest conversation.
Real forgiveness.
Because at some point, right, the relationship between a parent and a teen has to transition from just, hey, do what I do, to, hey, I'm trying to give you wisdom and understanding so that you can live in the world and be your own person and make good decisions, right? And so when is that transition?
It's like as a parent, you don't just prepare the road for your children. You prepare your children for the road.
Yeah.
Right? I read that somewhere, Barna or someone once, but it just always resonated with me that we've got to be forward thinking in terms of equipping our children to take life head on.
It's good, man. And then
especially those teenage years are so close to adulthood.
Yeah. And then you get into the build phase, right? Which is like, hey, we've rebuilt this bridge now, and now we can both start to walk across it. So now we can start to have conversations about things that matter, right? Now we can start to have the conversations about what's really going on in your life, how things are really going, what's really going on with you and your boyfriend or your girlfriend, what's really going on with you in your school, are you being bullied or not bullied, what's going on with sex and all those different types of things that are happening in this day and age, right? How are you engaging on technology? Who are you when you engage with it? Now we can start to have those real conversations, right? About real issues because we've built the bridge. We have trust. We can share with each other and be vulnerable with each other and give wisdom to one another and help one another grow, right? It's not just, hey, I'm the parent, I'm teaching the teen, but actually your teen can teach you things about the world too. And you can both grow together,
very true.
Right? Now, the level of teaching and what's being taught is going to be different, right?
Sure.
But once again, both feel valued. Both feel like they are bringing something to the table. And I think that can build something that, basically keeps a family unit together for years to come, right? And so as I think about the holiday season, as I think about, whatever your experience may be, whatever you may be going through, like my homie John here, it could be a good experience. It could be a bad experience. I hope that whatever family you do have that you're able to connect with, you connect with them. And who knows, perhaps this is what you needed to hear in order to go and engage that family member that perhaps you haven't engaged in a long time. Or perhaps it's what you needed to hear to go and engage your teenager in a way you haven't engaged them in a long time, or perhaps never engaged them in. And if you haven't, that's okay. There's no greater time like the present, right? To go ahead and engage in those conversations. And just to wrap it up here today, obviously we want to share with you a little bit of our perspective as Christians. The reality is that when it comes to family, there's brokenness and there's hurt and there's pain and there's suffering in all of our stories. And the reality of that is true because of this thing that we call sin, right? This thing on the inside of us that causes us to do things that we know we shouldn't, right? And that thing that we know causes us to do things that we shouldn't has also disconnected us with our Creator, right? And so we're disconnected from our Creator and we're disconnected from each other. And so that's why we see this fragmented thing happening in our relationships. That's why we see the things that are going on in our world and we say, man, that's evil and that shouldn't be happening. And people shouldn't be doing that to one another. But that thing that's out there is also on the inside of us. It's why we lie, cheat, steal, take advantage of each other. And so ultimately, I think that everything we've said today is helpful and good and right. But the thing that you need at the center of that is a relationship with God, a relationship with Jesus. And once you have that at the center, and then you start to move out in this stuff, you can see incredible transformation happen in your family. You can see incredible things happen between you and your teenager. And ultimately, what does it help you realize? This reality that, like, it's not your job to change your teenager's heart, right? That's something that God can do. Now, what we do is we engage in conversation, love, give wisdom, and give discipline when needs be, right? Because that's just one of those things. But what we don't want to do is just quell behavior and there be no heart transformation, right? What we want to see is genuine transformation, genuine growth on the inside of that person. And obviously we believe that comes through faith.
Yeah, man, that's good. I mean, obviously the brokenness of relationships is the thing that we're talking about with the need for forgiveness. Holiday season coming up, Thanksgiving, Christmas, what is it all about? It's about giving, right? And I think one of the greatest gifts that you can give to someone, and I would encourage every person to think about that, is the gift of forgiveness.
That's good, man.
Giving someone, you may not have a lot to give to someone, but if you have really gotten to a place, and I'm not talking about the sweep it under the carpet type of forgiveness, I'm talking about the gut-wrenching time in prayer, looking at what the Bible may have to say, reading articles, talking to some spiritual leaders, talking to some family members, whoever inspires you, encourages you, because it's real easy to get into a dark place. It's really easy to get into negative thinking. And in this holiday time, I'd just say if the person that you have offense with is still around and you feel that the trauma is not such that trying to reach out to them would be more harm than good, I would just encourage every person that's listened to this podcast to just take some time, go through the stuff that we talked about today, and just really try to think through some of this stuff and see how it might apply to your life.
That's good, man. Well, that was the RLTK Phoenix podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, go ahead and share on social. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, or subscribe to us at YouTube. You can basically find us under RLTKPHX. If you type that in on any of those platforms, you'll find us. This podcast is on all the major podcasting places, iTunes, Spotify, you name it, it's there. So you can share it from there as well. Hope you guys enjoyed today. We'll be back soon. We love y'all. Appreciate you listening. Take care. Peace.
Blessings.